to the third informational meeting we're having on Prop Howell. And tonight we're going to have a brief presentation for you, kind of give you kind of how we got here, where we're going, and why we're putting this proposition on the ballot. Also with us tonight is Chad Lang, a member of the Board of Education, Sandra Ferguson, member of the Board of Education, and Renee Cope, a member of the Board of Education. Seated at the head table is our entire cabinet, starting with our Chief Human Resources Officer, and our Chief Financial Officer, and our Superintendent, and our CFO. So we'll all be here answering questions for you tonight. I don't want to spend a lot of time in introductions, because what's more important is we want to hear from you. We'll take questions and answers after our presentation. But the first thing I want to kind of tell you about why we're here today. If you look back at our last time we asked for a tax increase, it was 2004. And we're in 2016 now. And you're going to see on the slide presentation tonight a very interesting number in which we just now got back to the 2009 assessed valuation number. And we get our revenues from two different places. We get them from local revenues, and we also get them from the state. So it's kind of always a guessing game as to what we're going to get from the state after they kind of get through their numbers and their budget and what they're going to appropriate. And then it comes up to us. And just to kind of give you an idea of kind of the decisions that we make quickly on the board is just a month ago on a Thursday, we got information from the governor saying he's withholding additional funds from us from education. It was $18 million. And that was about $333,000 for Francis Howell. And so how does that affect us? It's tremendous. I mean, that's teacher salaries, that's books, that's technology. That's stuff that we have to come up with that the state no longer funds. And what's unfortunate is back in 2005, the state used to fund almost 50% of our transportation costs to get kids to school. Today, that line item is $10 million that we come up with, and the state funds $2 million. So we not only have to come up with the additional funds, but we also have to transport the kids to school. So, it's decision making that's quick, and sometimes we don't get a lot of notice. So then it becomes the taxpayer's responsibility to handle this. And we've got a very bright chief financial officer, but what he doesn't have is a crystal ball. And sometimes a crystal ball doesn't give us good news. And so that's why we're here tonight. We're talking about the needs of the school district, and hopefully you'll get your questions answered. You'll see where the situation is, and the presentation that you're going to see tonight will verify our findings and what our need is. So hopefully we'll get to all your questions tonight. I'm going to bring up Matt Dyken, our Chief Communications Officer. He's going to explain to you the question round prior to Mr. Suttle doing the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. LaFata. As Mr. LaFata mentioned, we do have several ways for you to submit your questions. You can do these anonymously, obviously. You can text your question to 636-328-3502. You can email your question to communications@FHSD schools. And if you're an old school hard copy kind of person, we have some volunteer administrators in the back of the room that have good old-fashioned 3x5 index cards. They're happy to hand them to you, and you can write your questions down and then pass them back to the aisle, and we'll get those answered at the end of the presentation. So once again, you can text it, you can email it, or you can just write it down on a piece of paper, and we'll get to it as soon as we're done presenting the information. First up is our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Kevin Supple.
Thank you, Matt. Mark, can you hear me okay? It's hard for me to tell from here. One of the things that I'd like to remind people about when we have an opportunity to speak to them is that Francis Howell School District is one of the largest employers in St. Charles County. We are a large entity. We cover 150 square miles. We employ 2,200 people. We educate about 18,000 students. And we are a consumer of goods, and we try to consume goods from St. Charles County vendors as much as possible. But also a number of our employees, particularly in our support personnel, live in the Francis Howell School District as well as work here. And so we are a big driver of economic activity in St. Charles County. And sometimes people don't think of us as a business, but we really are. And we have a pretty important effect on the overall economic health of St. Charles County. I want to talk a little bit about our revenue and what's happened with that. So in 2004, as Mr. LaFata mentioned, the Board of Education was successful in passing a tax initiative. That was an 89-cent increase in the operating levy. And at the time that was marketed to the voters, the governor had been withholding a substantial amount of state revenue. Shortly after the April elections, the governor released all of those funds, and school districts across the state found themselves in a unique situation. Our board took a very proactive step, very respectful of its taxpaying community, and they voluntarily rolled back their tax rate by 25 cents. And so that equated to about $5 million on an annual basis that we did not collect, that we had authority to collect. And the board did that for a period of 6 years, from 2004 until 2010. And so a little over $30 million of revenue did not come into the school district that we actually had authority to collect. But again, I think the board is very respectful of taxpayers, and they wanted to make sure that they were only taxing as much as they needed to operate the programs that were important for our kids. So that's a part of our story. Beginning in 2009, our assessed values began to decline, a very unusual situation for St. Charles County, which had been the fastest growing county in the state for years. But we did have assessed valuations decline from 2009. Only in 2015 did our assessed values begin to grow again. In a reassessment cycle, which happens every odd-numbered year, we would realize about $2 million of new revenue. We would realize about $2 million of new revenue as a result of the reassessment process. So our revenue does not grow in direct proportion to the change in assessed value, but that is an important component of our revenue picture overall. And in that period from 2009 to 2015, we did not see that normal growth. So that had a pretty significant impact on our revenue picture. The next item would be our state aid. And the state has not been able to fully fund the formula that they use to deliver aid to school districts. And that's been in place for a number of years now. And so we haven't been able to count on our local revenue growth, and we didn't get that state revenue growth. And then finally, in 2014, a portion of the levy that was approved in 2004 had a sunset provision, and that actually expired in 2014, and that generated about $4 million on an annual basis. And so that's another piece of how our revenue has changed since that time. So that's $4 million a year that we are not collecting as a result of the loss of that special purpose levy. Now, we didn't just take a look at the loss of revenue and bemoan our fate. We tried to take some very proactive positions to change that. And so we did make some significant reductions. Since 2008, we've decreased 190 staff positions district-wide. Last year, we made $8.2 million in cuts $4.2 million of those were personnel reductions. This year, we made an additional $4 million in cuts, and $3.2 million of those were personnel reductions. And so we've really tried to take a critical look at our expenditures and make some very difficult choices about reducing our expenditures in light of that revenue picture that I just shared with you. And then I do want to acknowledge the fact that we did make an investment in our staff. We added some days to the teaching contract that allows our teachers time to work on their professional development. We believe very strongly that if our teachers are going to be the best that they can be, they need to have time to learn the same way that our kids need to have time to learn. We spent a year studying the issue and looked at all types of solutions about how best to provide teachers with additional time for their professional learning. We ended up determining that adding days to the contract is the best way to do that. So we did increase their workload and their work calendar, and we increased their salaries in a way that we believe was commensurate with the increased workload that we have for our teachers. Some of the reductions that we made as part of those $12 million of cuts in the last 2 years. We don't have the same level of supports in place for our struggling learners. That includes things like individual tutoring programs, some of the interventionists that were available in our buildings, and some of the online practice materials that kids could use. We've made a number of staffing reductions across the entire spectrum, so not only classroom teachers, but counselors and special education staff and some of our alternative high school staffing as well. Support personnel are included in there as well. We've been very proactive in introducing technology into our curriculum. We want our kids to have access to technology, and we want them to be best prepared to compete in the real world when they leave Howell School District. So we have introduced a lot of technology into our classrooms, but we've not in the last 2 years been able to continue the replacement cycle. So we had been on the process of replacing devices every 4 or 5 years, depending upon the particular device, but we've not been able to do that for the last 2, so we're behind on that cycle. The same is true with our textbooks and other curriculum materials. We have a renewal cycle. We try every 6 years or so to update and refresh our curriculum and to provide the resources that would go along with that newly written curriculum, and we have not been able to keep up that cycle as we would like. This year, we've introduced some additional cuts getting into the sports and extracurricular offerings, as well as some of the ancillary programs you can see listed up here. Something as minor as the support that we provide for our parent involvement to encourage our parents to be involved in their kids' education. We haven't been able to provide that, or the same level of supports for our new teachers. So the cuts really have crossed the entire gamut of our organization. I'd like to now invite our superintendent, Dr. Mary Hendricks Harris, to come up, and she will share with you some specific information about Proposition Howell.
So I'm going to share a few things about the proposition itself. The first thing that we're going to talk about is why, and one of the things we know is that we had an independent survey done of our patrons. And they said very strongly, 99% of them, that it was important for our district to be the best performing district in St. Charles County. And we know with some of the supports that Mr. Supple mentioned being pulled because of reductions, that is going to be very difficult to maintain. So you can see in this slide that as of the 14-15 school year, we were the top performing district according to state assessments in St. Charles County. And again, we are concerned that that's going to be very difficult to maintain over the course of time as we make reductions, especially reductions for struggling learners, as well as our advanced learners who require additional supports. Another reason why is that we know property values are very closely tied. There's been numerous studies about the positive relationship between school district and assessed valuations or property values. So we, again, believe that as we strive to be a high-achieving district, that is very closely tied to property values. And one of the things that I continue to say is that not only is it closely tied to property values, it's closely tied to our community. And so our district, even if you're going to live here for forever, your property and your community is very much tied to the quality of our school district. And we believe our school district is a bedrock of the community. as the district goes, so does the community. So what is it that we're talking about exactly? Our levy will be for 60 cents. It will be on the November 8th ballot. It requires a simple majority, or 50% plus one to pass. And we haven't been out for an operating levy since 2004. What will it cost? The average homeowner, if you think about a $200,000 home, it's $19 a month or $228 a year. One of the things that we would recommend is that if you are asking yourself that question, that you go to our website and put the estimated value of your home into the calculator, and it will tell you what it's going to cost. It's a much simpler way than trying to calculate it yourself. It's available for you. Last August, we also went out for tax levy, and we were told that the community was not ready for that, handed late. And so we've made some adjustments as we go out this year. And I just kind of want to go through some of those adjustments with you. One of the things that we made an adjustment in was the amount. So we are now going out for 60 cents. And originally we had asked for 90. 60 cents is not going to allow us to bring back all of the positions and address all of the needs that we currently have. But it will allow us to address some of the most critical positions and to get us back on our feet. The timing was another concern that we had heard. August is an election where not all of our registered voters go out to vote. November, we believe we will have a very, very high turnout. And so that's another adjustment that we made, was to the timing. We had heard that communications, while we had a large turnout for an August election, but we did hear that communication wasn't there. We had people on vacation or people that were out of town. And we have made a concerted effort to increase our communication focus. So, for example, this is the third of 3 informational meetings that we're having with our community. We have spoken with many groups. We have done informational mailings to homes in our district. We have increased our newsletters. If you're a parent in our district, you have heard about Proposition Howell. No doubt in my mind, we have made lots and lots of efforts to increase our communication efforts. Other things that are some adjustments since then, when we went out in August, we had planned cuts for that school year, but they had not happened. So in the 15-16 school year, there were $8 million in cuts, and this school year there are $4 million in cuts. So the school district, while those cuts were planned, no one had lived with the reality of those reductions in day-to-day operations in our buildings. And then finally, this school year, we did freeze all of our salaries across the district. That was another concern we had heard about. So the future without Prop Howell, kind of starting with the bad first, the cuts, or those reductions, those things we've had to cut in the budget, will remain in place. And we will need to find some additional reductions. Prices of things are increasing, things like our liability insurance, state mandates that are unfunded, those things cost us money, and we will have to make reductions in order to make those things happen. We can't go forever without technology replacement in our district. That is going to happen. And with all of those things, reductions are going to have to occur. And as we think about those reductions in that list that we may have to prepare, the impact of those reductions are going to happen more and more in the everyday classroom in all of our buildings across. So we have tried very hard for the reductions to not directly impact every child across our district every day, and that is going to become more and more difficult over the course of time. And our status, our academic excellence status, is going to be more and more difficult to maintain. Now, the right side, with it passing, we have identified some priorities. One of those being technology. As I said, we can't continue to not replace. We will replace. We will address our firewall and our connectivity, being more reliable and more speedy. Our staffing, we have some critical staffing needs. We need to have some, we call them ESCs, but some crisis counselors in our buildings. We need to address our English as second language population. That's something that we're going to be held accountable for in the near future. We would like to restore some teaching assistant positions and some critical classroom teacher positions moving forward. You heard Mr. Supple talking about our curriculum and our textbooks getting annual. We would like to get back on our refreshment cycle of both of those things. We have some capital and maintenance projects, things like our HVAC systems and security vestibules and things at our buildings that we also need to address. So here's the ballot language. I'm not going to read that whole thing to you word for word, but one of the things that's important to know is that our ballot, our part of the ballot is at the very end of the ballot. So it's going to be a long ballot, and Proposition Howell will be at the end of it. And so you are here tonight to be informed about it, and you will want to stick to the end of the ballot to make sure that your voice is heard. There is a tax credit available for seniors and certain individuals with disabilities, and you can get more information about that at the Missouri Department of Revenue website. Other things about the election, we are expecting a very high voter turnout, as I had mentioned. We will not have school in session that day to make it more convenient for our voters who vote in our schools. It is a large ballot issue, and again, we're going to be at the end of it. We have lots of information available on our website. There's frequently asked questions. There is this PowerPoint. There is the calculator. There is lots and lots of information available on the Francis Howell website under Prop Howell tax levy. People are finding that very helpful as they seek out additional information. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Dr. Hendricks-Harris. Again, we have our volunteer administrators that have some note cards if you'd like to write down some questions. And you can continue to text them to the phone number you see on the screen. And we'll continue to take questions long after this evening's presentation at our email address, communications@francishowellschools.org. Can we see a list that shows how much has been cut by item? Actually, as the superintendent alluded to, if you go to the website, and we have a Prop Howell tax levy information page, and there is an item, and what is it labeled exactly?
FHSD budget reduction.
Budget reductions. It doesn't necessarily put a dollar figure on every individual little thing, but it gives you an idea of where those cuts have been made. Mr. Suffolk, do you want to expand on the how much has been cut by item question?
You know them all off the top of your head?
The line item by line item, I'm not going to be able to recite from memory, but as I shared during my presentation, of the $8.2 million that we made in reductions last year, $1.2 million of that was in personnel. Of the $4 million additional cuts made this year, $3.2 million of that was in personnel. So the big takeaway that I would share with the community tonight is that when we made our cuts for 15-16, there were some non-personnel items that we could address. And when we got to making cuts for 16-17, the non-personnel items, there wasn't much left for us to address because the discretionary part of our budget is relatively small in that respect. And so personnel reductions are becoming a disproportionately large part of cuts that we would have to make if we would go into the future.
We have a hard copy of the list if that person would like to see us.
So if that was your question, come see us afterwards and we have that list. How has enrollment changed since 2008 and what's projected in the coming years?
We have lost about 50 students or so a year. We have declined when it's difficult for me to say exactly from 2008, but I will tell you that in the last 12 years, we've lost about 1,000 students. But when we make those reductions, they happen 75 or maybe 100 students a year. We're actually beginning to see a slight uptick now. But when that happens across 23 sites and 17,000 plus kids, we don't reduce our operating expenditures very much because taking 4 or 5 kids out of a single school that has 8 or or 900 students enroll doesn't change your operating cost basis. So we have, our student population has declined in the last 12 years by about 1,000 students. Projections for the future are to see very stable or slightly increasing numbers, particularly as the economy continues to recover and we see subdivisions being completed that were put on hold during the housing crisis.
What important programs and other necessities would be cut if Proposition Howell doesn't pass?
So, as one of the board members, I can explain to you that that is a significant conversation that the board has had over the last couple of years because of the cuts that we've already made. So, after we've taken $12 million out of our budget already, and we've discussed that we've tried very hard to make sure those cuts were not affecting most of our students in the classroom on an everyday basis. As mentioned previously, that's not going to be the case. So we're considering numerous things. I'll bring up one of the elephants in the room. So we have talked about transportation. Thus far, we haven't made that decision. We have to look at it though. So when we look at salaries and benefits being one of our largest expenses in the district, because we are a people business and we want quality educators in with our students, teaching our kids for our future. We've looked at that and we've cut numerous positions. We're down to the bone now. So when we look at the next largest item on our budget, it is transportation. We haven't made that decision yet because we are not a walking district. Our schools are not set up to have our children walk to schools. And safety of our kids is very important to us. So as we look at transportation, as we look at activities, as we look at not replenishing the technology, there's numerous items that we have to consider. And we're here today and we've put it on the ballot because we hope we don't have to make those decisions.
And as Renee said, we've had numerous conversations about this. I've been around for quite a while, and we've had many discussions over the years on what cuts to make, and there's not one cut that anybody up here likes to make. This school district is a representation of our community, and we're very proud of it, and there's not one cut that we want to make. However, if we don't get additional revenue to support us, then that will be a big topic of conversation. And 7 people make that decision, not just 2. Losing $333,000 additional revenue that is going to affect transportation directly. So back in 2005, the state used to fund $162 million for transportation, and today they fund $105 million. So that's a significant cut in cost just to transport kids to school. So it costs us $12 million to get the kids to school. We fund $10 million of it. So it's one of the items we don't want to look at, but certainly, everything's available and on the table because we still got to educate kids.
How will rising property assessments affect Francis Howell's revenue, and when will we see these effects?
A component of the state constitution is that any taxing jurisdiction is limited in the amount of growth that they can recognize as a result of changes in assessed value. So as our assessed value increases, we only recognize, and again, only in a reassessment year, so only every other year, a level of growth on existing property that's equal to the CPI or 5%, whichever is less. So in the 2015 reassessment cycle, our assessed value on average in the school district increased by 5.4%, but the CPI as calculated by the state auditor was 0.8%. So we realized 0.8% revenue growth on existing property in the most recent reassessment cycle. And of course, in the cycles prior to that, we saw no growth as a result of reassessment because we had negative reassessment values. So the constraint by the Constitution is that we can only grow by the lesser of 5% or CPI. And for the foreseeable future, I'm sure we'll
board is very responsible in that we're only gonna access the funds that we need. When we approve an operating levy, it's available to be taxed. Not necessarily all of it. As you heard in the opening, Mr. Casuppo's presentation, I was a member of the board when we began to roll the taxes back and not take the full amount. So it's one of them things that the board is very concerned about. We certainly don't want to raise taxes, but we have a school district to support, and we're only going to take the funds available to us that we absolutely need. We believe that 60 cents will get us a long way.
Some candidates on the November ballot say they'll fully fund Missouri's K-12 education formula. If that happens, how will this impact Francis Howell's revenue?
I'll answer the question as the Chief Operating Officer of Francis Howell School District and not a statewide candidate for governor, so please understand that. The gap that exists between where we are right now and what is required for full funding, even with the recent legislative initiative that reduced that gap still remains around $200 million. And so that's a pretty significant amount of revenue for the state to come up with. And by way of example, the governor requested $85 million for this year, and the General Assembly only appropriated $70 million. And so we have a pretty significant gap to close. So what are some of the challenges facing the state? As Mr. LaFava alluded to earlier, revenue for the state of Missouri as a whole is behind what they projected it would be, and as a result, the governor has begun to withhold some funds. So they're not sure that they will be able to fully fund what's been appropriated this year. So there are revenue challenges in the state currently. And also, several years ago, the General Assembly approved a measure that limits the amount of revenue growth the state will receive. So if our revenue grows by $150 million, they will begin to reduce the individual income tax rates and some of the business tax rates in order to actually collect less state revenue. So we have a fairly significant gap that remains. They haven't been able to make significant progress towards closing that gap, and the challenges in the future will be that the constraints put in place by mandated rollback of individual income tax rates, which generate around 65% of the state's general revenue, will make it harder for them to close that gap because they're reducing their amount of income at the same time that the gap is remaining the same or increasing.
And keep in mind, that's just a promise from one person that really doesn't make that decision. The governor relies on the House and the Senate when they pass bills and appropriations. So a governor can make a promise, but it takes a whole lot more people to fulfill that promise. And so we don't hold a lot of hope out there, as we've not seen full funding since I've been on the board. So it certainly would be a great dream for us. We'd love it, and certainly would alleviate some burden on the taxpayers. But that's a pipe dream, and until we actually see it, it's very difficult for us to plan for that.
It's also an easier promise to make now than it was a year ago. Because the state didn't increase the funding and lowered the student adequacy target, so the definition of fully funded is a lot lower than it was a year ago. Classroom sizes are critically important. Aren't our class sizes already above the state recommended levels?
Yes.
Our class sizes are increasing. Over the last couple of years, our class sizes have started to grow. And we have, as we look just at our elementary level and look at the grade levels across all of our buildings, over 18% of them are at areas where we struggle with the numbers of students in those classrooms. And we know that without Proposition Howell, that is where the future cuts will come from, and we will see those class sizes start to increase even more so. And so that is a critical area that Proposition Howell will help us with.
I would just add that the state has several different numbers that they work with. They have kind of what we would, in layman's terms, call recommended and maximum, and we have not gone over, the required ratios, but we are not nearly desirable either. So that's something that we use as our parameters, and our target is to work more towards the desirable than to being out of compliance. Absolutely, we have some critical areas this year. We've heard some concerns and some complaints, and again, if we don't pass levy, that's not going to get any better.
How long will the tax levy sustain the district, and does it ever expire?
The 60-cent increase that we're requesting this time does not have a sunset provision, so it does not expire. The projections that I've worked on for the board, we have a target to maintain a minimum of 15 to 20% fund balance, and that's the amount of revenue that we need to have on hand to cash flow the district between the beginning of our fiscal year and December 15th, which is when we receive our first property tax disbursement. So we have expenses in those first 6 months, but we don't have any significant revenue coming in because the taxes are well over 50% of our total operating revenue. And so in order to, the 60 cents would allow us, based on a certain assumptions that have been made up to this point about expenditure trends, would allow us to maintain our fund balance percentage, certainly for the 5 years of our future projection period, and potentially beyond that, but I don't create projections more than 5 years in the future because I think that they become much more unrealistic and unreliable. So we always share with the board a 5-year projection period, and certainly the 60 cents would allow us to be within our fund balance criteria for that period. Again, that's assuming that we don't see major shifts in healthcare costs or some other factors that we haven't been able to account for at this point.
How are students being affected by these cuts day to day in the classroom?
Some of the supports, some of the supports for students, for struggling learners have been cut. So all the schools had budgets for tutoring programs that they can embed into their school day or after school, so those supports are not there. Interventionists are not available for in the schools as well, and we had to reduce some of our AP course offerings because of the staff cuts. We are not able to run the AP classes that had smaller enrollments. So at the 3 high schools, there are several AP classes that weren't able to be offered this year. So the cuts run a range between hitting our struggling learners without having those supports, and then also opportunities for our advanced learners.
Have you had any suggestions from taxpayers in what areas to cut? Has the district done any surveys that would provide that information?
I presented the information about our budget to the Finance and Operations Committee, which has representatives from the community who serve and help bring the taxpayer voice to those discussions. So through that forum, we have solicited and received some feedback on cuts or approaches that we could take to help balance the budget within the school district. Outside of that, we do hold a budget workshop with the board in May of each year, where we have an opportunity to discuss the major impacts on the budget for the coming year. And the public certainly has an opportunity after that workshop to contact me or members of the board to share their ideas and concerns.
And I'll add just a little bit more to that. Several of our board members have also reached out to the community in different ways through social media, through meetings, through
was the total staff in 2008, and what is it today?
Can you give me a second? Go on to the next one, come back to it, and I'll get it for you.
Sure, because while you're looking, perhaps you can find this. What was the average district salary in 2008, and what is it today?
I don't know that I have the average salary. I may have the FTE.
What important programs and other necessities would be cut if Prop Howell doesn't pass?
Well, I think we had that discussion already. As we stated earlier, the board will make that decision as a whole. Certainly look at feedback from the community. But we also have, we have kids to educate and are responsible to educate them kids. So we have to make sure that those kids are a priority and learning takes place in our school. Short of that, everything is available. I can tell you this, sitting on the board for many years, we don't have a lot of waste in our school district. We're very efficient. We have information that shows how efficient we are. We have a very good system, and we've got a very good staff. And we certainly don't want to lose anybody. What's important is that we pass this tax increase to maintain our program that we currently have, because it's already suffering some suffering as far as the supports that we used to have, that we don't no longer have. If this doesn't pass, then we'll lose even more supports and things that are very important to kids. So certainly hope you support it, and feel free to ask us any more questions that you might have, and we'll certainly try to get the answers.
Mrs. Simpkins?
Thank you. Thanks for your patience. Well, I don't have the actual FTE here in front of me for 2008 and today. I can tell you that we have made those critical cuts throughout the years. We know that about 190 positions have been cut over the course of the years, and that is in certified and support staff positions. Those FTE numbers are difficult to share because one FTE is not always one body. Depending on the number of days or the number of hours a particular person may work, one body may equal a 0.5 or a 0.6 FTE when you look at the support staff side.
That's a full-time employee, right?
A full-time FTE, yes, a full-time equivalency, sorry. Thanks, Matt. So we do know, we do have made several reductions in those areas. As far as our salary has gone, we have a teacher salary comparison. Matt, if you can put that reference slide up, that will show you the starting salary for the Howell School District from 2013-14 through 16-17. Yeah, go back to where we were just at. And down there at the bottom, you'll see our starting salaries 13-14 all the way through 16-17. And in comparison to other school districts, their starting salaries within the St. Charles County area. And other districts also are listed up there at the top of that slide with their starting salaries this school year. But what I would share with you as you look at this information is that it's not always apples to apples. Teachers in different school districts work a different number of contracted days per year, and their hours per day can be very different. And so when you are looking at that information, it's important to consider all of those factors in comparing school districts to one another.
Why hasn't the strategic planning process looked at the possibility of a levy failure and outlined some alternatives so the public would have clear choices?
Sure, I 100% understand the question, but our strategic plan expires this year, and we did have a lot of conversation with the board and executive cabinet about which comes first, the chicken or the egg. So do you write a strategic plan before you go out for a tax levy, or do you go out for a tax levy and then have a strategic plan? It's very difficult to do the two simultaneously. So to have a meeting such as this tonight
and to have information shared about a tax levy and turn around and have a meeting and ask people to come in to talk about what are our long-term goals and our priorities for our district. Very difficult to get those two different types of engagement. And so it was decided that the tax levy was the first priority as we started the school year, and the strategic planning would be the next thing on our plate. So we are hopeful to get our strategic plan completed, win or lose that tax levy the rest of this school year, and to have it prepared, ready to go for the 17-18 school year.
I can tell you that we're overdue on a tax increase according to our latest strategic plan. And we held off for several years because of where the economy was. We didn't feel like it was right to go out and ask for a tax increase during some difficult times. And so we made do with balances and spent our balances down and made appropriate cuts. That certainly we tried not to affect the classroom. But the bottom line is we should have asked for a tax increase several years ago, but we held off on doing so. So it's just one of the things where you just didn't feel like we were dialed in and ready to go out there and ask during difficult times for our community.
I would just like to add to that, that if you consider Francis Howell going after a tax increase now, this is not new for the state of Missouri. I'm sure you've heard in the news about Hazelwood and Melville and Parkway and Winsville and St. Charles City and Fort Zumwalt and all the other school districts over the last 1.5 to 2 years that have also gone after tax increases. This is not new. We're actually the last district in the county in the last 2 years to pass a tax increase, and that's based on the economy. We've gone through the recession. We're trying to come out of it, but that's a long, long road for us.
Every school district in St. Charles County has passed a levy or bond issue in the past 2 years, and it's been 12 years for Francis Howell. In the last 2 years in St. Louis County, there have been over 60 levies or bond issues passed by school districts there. As a parent with a child in the district, I'm receiving a lot of information about Prop Howell. How are you communicating with residents who do not have children attending school within the district? Can I field this one?
Absolutely.
We are not unique in the fact that 2/3 of the people that live in our district do not have a direct relationship to the schools. We're also not unique because this information challenge exists year-round and not just when school districts have a levy or a bond issue on the ballot. As far as Prop Howell, we have reached out to our community in a variety of ways. Once upon a time, most school districts sent home a hard copy newsletter, and then as technology got better with the advent of really slick HTML email programs, a lot of school communicators were excited because we could make some really good-looking electronic newsletters. The problem is the only email addresses you had were parents in the district. So a lot of districts, in order to save money, stopped printing a hard copy newsletter that was distributed to all residents. Francis Howell began doing that again last year. So last year we started to send twice a year a newsletter to all 4,500 unique 45,000 unique addresses in the Francis Howell School District. Hopefully you saw one in your mailbox in August, and you'll be receiving another one at the end of October that has a lot of information about the district, but information about Proposition Howell as well. We've tried to advertise Proposition Howell in several different newspapers. The Boone Country Connection is a little paper that's down in the Augusta, Defiance, Numeli area. We've had information in there. We've had information in Mid-Rivers News Magazine. Our friends at the Post-Dispatch will be printing a free ad for us very soon in their larger distribution newspaper. We've shared information on our social media. We know that while that is primarily our parents, it does extend beyond just our parent community. And we've got information on the website as well. For the first time, we will be working with Spectrum Business to put some information on internet service provider websites. So people, we all hate pop-up ads, but some of them will be about Proposition Howell, and it'll provide a link back to the district website, where, as you saw earlier, we have lots of information. We've also done things like this community meeting tonight. This is the third in the series, as you heard earlier, in an attempt to reach out to our community and have them come in and get all the information they needed to about Proposition Howell. Are there more questions? Oh, Senior Pals. We also have a program called Senior Pals. We had an informational meeting at one of our schools a couple weeks ago. We'll have an event for our senior friends at Veterans Day and then at a fall play in November as well. Anybody else we have no more official questions. Of course, we'll all be available afterwards. Oh, I spoke too soon. Why are there 2 Francis Howell North buses that pick up in one subdivision and both are half empty before and after school?
We have 17,000 students in the district, and we transport about 12,000 of them every day. We try to run the buses as efficiently as possible, and the best way for us to do that is for a single vehicle to pick up high school kids and drop them off, and then pick up middle school kids and drop them off, and then pick up elementary school kids and drop them off, and then to reverse that process in the afternoon. So you're using one vehicle and one driver for a little bit of an extended period of time. It's a much more efficient way to do that. So sometimes what that means is, in order to get the kids to school on time and not have our students on the bus, or we try to target between 30 and not exceed 45 minutes of a bus ride, sometimes we have to create routes that would appear to the casual observer not to be very efficient, but in fact, because of the way that the bus is being utilized throughout the course of the day to transport all levels of children, and to do so in a way that gets kids to school as efficiently as possible with as little time on the bus as we can, it would sometimes appear that the buses are not very full. But if you take a look at that same vehicle when they're dropping kids off or picking kids up at an elementary school, they'll be jam-packed. And so we do make very efficient use of our buses, but it's not always visible to the casual observer in your particular neighborhood.
Do you have an estimate of monthly P-card expenditures, especially for food for meetings, banquets, etc.?
I can tell you that we spend a lot of money on our P-cards, but the reason that we do that is because it's much more cost-effective for us to do it that way than to generate purchase orders for some very small items. So if we're purchasing a toner cartridge for a printer at one of our offices, we can order that online from OfficeMax, have it delivered free of charge, and use our P-card. If we were to generate a purchase order for that, somebody has to create a requisition. The principal or administrator has to approve it. My office has to generate a physical piece of paper. We have to send that back to the building, and they have to send it to the vendor. So it can take several days to get an order initiated. So we do use our P-cards quite a lot, but we have reduced the transactional cost for our purchases as a result of doing that, because it's much more cost-effective to take advantage of online services and to do that. Specifically to the question about meals and food, we provide our buildings with a certain amount per pupil that is funded from vending revenue, which is funds that are generated outside of taxpayer resources that we provide to our buildings in order for them to have recognition activities of various types for their staff members, and sometimes that does involve food. So we do spend money on food. I couldn't tell you right now how much we do on a monthly basis, but we do spend money on food. But typically, that would not be taxpayer money. And we have set up our accounting system so that we track expenditures for student food separate from expenditures for staff food. So we have separate accounting codes for that. Because there will be times when we have banquets that honor our athletes or other extracurricular activity participants, and we will provide pizza or something like that for those students. But the student food is tracked separately from food for staff members.
I think, when in other districts where I have worked, if you would come for a 4 to 8 And that dinner would be provided because you are working people through their dinner, and in order to keep them engaged and working, dinner would be provided. And that is not something that we do in our district. So if you were to come to one of our meetings, one of our strategic meetings in the evenings, that is not something that we are able to do. And we have to send our participants an email saying, bring your own dinner because we're not able to provide it at this time. So that is certainly not a habit that we have in our district, and I think it's a fair question.
And one last question while we're on the topic of food. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter that lives with me that is not in daycare. That I received a letter from Francis Howell North stating she's approved for free or reduced lunches. Where do those funds actually go?
Francis Howell, of course, participates in the National School Lunch Program, and I don't know the specific circumstances, but I'll venture a guess here. Part of that program, we are able to do a direct certification. And so we take information that's available at the state level and match it against our student population, and then we notify families that they have been automatically approved because of the matchup of that data between the state level data and our particular student population. So an individual might be listed as a dependent and could have been included on that notice even though they're not in the school. But the funds that we receive through the National School Lunch Program have to be spent on the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program. So those are all federal, those federal funds that we receive are all spent in service of our food service program, providing nutritious meals for our kids each day.
And again, that's all of our questions. So we wanted to thank you for attending tonight. We thank you for your time. We'd also like to thank our board members present, as well as our cabinet. And we will all be available afterwards if you have any more questions. Thank you again.